Tennessee's relocation industry would pay actual money to bury this video because I'm counting down the 10 towns retirees moved to and then quietly wish they hadn't. And number 2 is a place you'd never expect. Once you realize that the average person who regrets a retirement move has already spent $30,000 to $40,000 getting there and back, you start asking some very uncomfortable questions about how carefully anybody actually checks. I spent months talking to people who made this move, and I kept asking the same question: would you do it again? Most said yes. The ones who said no were remarkably specific. So I drove all 10 of these places myself, and I found a lake town that lost its only hospital and never got it back, a landscape so damaged by industry that astronauts once used it as a landmark, a state line running straight down the middle of Main Street, and a town where an entire neighborhood turns over every 3 years. If you'd rather know all this before you sign, hit that subscribe button now because we're counting all 10 down and you do not want to miss number 1. Let's count it down. Number 10, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. When I first drove into Murfreesboro, I understood exactly why people came here. 35 minutes from Nashville, a real university, a historic square, and for years it was the answer to the question of how to be near a great city without paying for it. Then I tried to get across town at 5 in the afternoon. Here's what happened, and it happened fast. Murfreesboro has been one of the fastest growing cities in America, and the infrastructure did not grow with it. What was farmland in 2010 is subdivisions now. What was a 15-minute errand is 40, and prices followed the growth exactly, which means the affordability that brought people here has largely evaporated. The people who regret this move mostly bought lay tea. They researched Murfreesboro as it existed in the articles they'd read, which described a town 3 or 4 years behind the one they actually arrived in. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Murfreesboro. There's a marker here identifying the geographic center of the state, and this town was actually Tennessee's capital from 1818 to 1826, before the legislature moved it permanently to Nashville, the center of the state, and it's still filling in. Here's your takeaway. When you research a fast-growing town, check the date on everything you read. In a market moving this quickly, a 3-year-old article isn't slightly out of date. It's describing a different place. Number 9, Bristol, Tennessee. When I first drove into Bristol, I stood on State Street and looked down at a line painted across the pavement, and it took me a second to understand what I was seeing. That's the state line, straight down the middle of the main street. Bristol is 2 cities with one name. Bristol, Tennessee and Bristol, Virginia sit against each other, and the border runs down the center of the business district. It is a genuinely charming place with a serious music history and a real regional hospital system. And it is a trap for anybody who doesn't read carefully, because Tennessee has no state income tax, and Virginia does. Virginia doesn't tax Social Security benefits, but it does tax other retirement income, with an age deduction that phases out as your income rises. So 2 retirees can live 400 feet apart on the same street, shop in the same stores, and file completely different tax returns for the rest of their lives. 400 feet, thousands of dollars a year. Now here's the wildcard fact about Bristol. In 1927, a record producer set up in a building here and recorded the sessions that first captured the Carter family and Jimmie Rodgers. Congress has recognized this town as the birthplace of country music, and those recordings are why. An entire American art form from a temporary studio on a state line. Here's your takeaway, and it applies to every border town in this country. Before you make an offer, confirm which state the parcel is in, not the mailing address, the parcel. Mailing addresses cross state lines all the time. Tax obligations don't care what your envelope says. Number 8, Copperhill and Ducktown, Tennessee. When I first drove into the Copper Basin, I thought I'd found a genuinely beautiful corner of the state. Polk County, tucked into the far southeast, the Ocoee River running through it, mountains on every side, and prices that seem impossible for scenery this good. Then somebody at the museum told me what this place looked like 50 years ago. Copper mining and smelting started here in the 1840s, and the process released so much sulfur dioxide that the acid rain killed the vegetation across roughly 50 square miles. The topsoil eroded. The trees went. What was left was described in the literature as a desert, and it stayed that way for a century. TVA and the mining companies spent about 70 years planting something like 16 million trees to bring it back, and it worked. The land is green again. The Ocoee hosted the Olympic whitewater events in 1996. But this is still a Superfund site, and it is still a very small, very remote place. 2 tiny towns, a limited services base, and a drive to anything substantial. Now, here's the wildcard fact about this basin. The damage was so extensive that astronauts reportedly used it as a visible landmark from orbit, alongside things like the Great Wall of China. You could see it from space. That is not a figure of speech. Here's your takeaway. When a place is beautiful and unaccountably cheap, look up its industrial history before you look at anything else. It usually explains the price, and occasionally it explains more than that. Number 7. Hendersonville, Tennessee. When I first drove into Hendersonville, the pitch made complete sense to me. Old Hickory Lake wrapping around the town, water at the end of a lot of streets, 25 minutes to downtown Nashville, and a genuine music town history. Then I drove that 25 minutes at 4:30 on a Wednesday. It took over an hour. Because Hendersonville is not really a lake town anymore, it's a commuter corridor with a lake attached, and the main artery through it carries far more traffic than it was ever built for. If you're retired, you can simply avoid rush hour, which is the honest answer. But your grandchildren can't. Your daughter driving up from Nashville can't. And the medical appointment scheduled for 4 o'clock certainly can't. The other half is cost. Sumner County has been discovered thoroughly, and lakefront here now prices like a Nashville suburb because that is functionally what it is. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Hendersonville. Johnny Cash and June Carter lived here for decades on Old Hickory Lake, and their lakeside house stood until it burned in 2007 while being renovated by its next owner. The house is gone. The town is still selling the story. Here's your takeaway. Any town within 45 minutes of a booming metro is not a small town. It is a suburb that hasn't updated its self-image yet, and you will pay suburb prices and sit in suburb traffic. Number 6. Celina, Tennessee. When I first drove into Celina, I understood the appeal in about a minute. Clay County sits right on Dale Hollow Lake, some of the clearest water in the eastern United States, and this county has marketed itself for years as the gateway to it, explicitly, deliberately, as a retirement destination. Then I drove past the hospital, and it was dark. Cumberland River Hospital closed in March of 2019. About 140 people lost their jobs. A new owner bought it and reopened it in April of 2020, then closed it again 4 months later, and it has largely sat since. Local reporting at the time noted the nearest emergency room had become a substantial drive, and county officials said plainly what everyone already knew. Here's the line that stuck with me. Reporters covering the closure wrote that the county advertises itself as a retirement location, and that the absence of a hospital is a serious deterrent for exactly the people it is trying to attract. The county's whole pitch, undercut by the county's biggest loss. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Dale Hollow. In 1955, a man fishing this lake landed a smallmouth bass weighing 11 pounds and 15 ounces, and 70 years later, across every lake on Earth, nobody has broken it. Here's your takeaway. A hospital is not a permanent feature of a town. It is a business with a balance sheet, and in rural Tennessee, it can close on 90 days' notice or less. Ask when the local hospital was last profitable, and who owns it now. If you're learning things nobody mentioned when you started looking at this state, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are running the same numbers you are. Number 5. Jellico, Tennessee. When I first drove into Jellico, I was coming down off the mountain on Interstate 75 at the Kentucky line, and the setting is legitimately beautiful. Campbell County, Norris Lake to the south. A small mountain town with housing costs near the bottom of the state. Then I saw the building. Jellico's hospital closed in March of 2024 after a federal and state audit found the facility in immediate jeopardy. The emergency room shut at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, announced by a sheet of paper taped to the door. Residents found out when they read it. That was over 2 years ago, and as of this spring, the building was still sitting empty. Reporting from earlier this year described busted water pipes, ceiling tiles down, and wallpaper peeling because nobody has been heating or cooling it. Multiple operators have been in negotiation since. Nothing has reopened. Meanwhile, the nearest emergency rooms are roughly half an hour away, La Follette or across the state line in Kentucky. Now, here's the wildcard fact about this. Since 2010, Tennessee has recorded the second most rural hospital closures of any state and the most per capita in the country. Jellico's story is not unusual here. It is the pattern. The most in America per person. That's the state you're moving to. Here's your takeaway. Do not evaluate a town's healthcare by whether a hospital building exists. Evaluate it by whether the emergency room was staffed and open last night. Those are two entirely different questions, and only one of them matters at 2 in the morning. Number 4. Columbia, Tennessee. When I first drove into Columbia, it was being called the affordable answer to Franklin, and the square genuinely deserved the attention. Maury County, restored storefronts, real history, an hour from Nashville. Then the industrial money arrived. This corridor has become one of the most significant manufacturing investment zones in the Southeast, and the housing market responded the way housing markets do. What was a bargain became a market, and then became expensive, inside about 5 years. The retirees who regret this one all say a version of the same thing. They read that Columbia was the cheap alternative, took 18 months to sell up north and get here, and arrived to find the discount had closed while they were packing. The bargain window shut while they were in transit, and the growth brings the rest of it. Traffic on the corridor, construction everywhere, and a town changing faster than the people who moved there for its stability would like. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Columbia. This town calls itself the mule capital of the world, and it has held Mule Day since the 1840s. It draws tens of thousands of people to a parade of mules every spring, in a county now building batteries and vehicles, mules and megafactories. Same county. Here's your takeaway. In any boom corridor, price the market at the date you'll actually close, not the date you started looking. If a place is appreciating 10% a year, and your move takes a year, your budget is already 10% wrong. Number 3. Lenoir City, Tennessee. When I first drove into Lenoir City, I could see precisely why the retirees came. Loudoun County, water on 2 sides, mountains in the distance, and an enormous influx of out-of-state buyers who arrive for exactly the reasons you're considering. That influx is the problem. Here's what people describe. They left a crowded, expensive, traffic-choked place specifically to escape it and moved into one of the fastest-growing retirement corridors in East Tennessee, where the main highway now backs up, the subdivisions keep multiplying, and the lakefront that was reasonable a decade ago is priced for people who sold houses in California. They didn't escape it. They joined it 1 year late. That is the most common regret I heard anywhere in the state, and it has almost nothing to do with the town itself. Lenoir City is fine. It's pleasant, it's well located, Knoxville is half an hour, the medical access is real. The regret isn't that the town is bad. It's that people paid a premium to move somewhere that would feel like an escape, and it stopped feeling like one. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Loudoun County. Fort Loudoun Dam, right here, was completed in 1943, and the lock beside it lifts boats about 80 feet, part of the system that lets a vessel travel the Tennessee River all the way from Knoxville to the Ohio. Here's the takeaway. If the reason you're moving is to get away from crowds, do not move to the place that is currently winning every retirement ranking. By the time a town makes those lists, the thing you wanted from it is already being consumed. Number 2, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. When I first drove into Oak Ridge, I could not believe what it costs to live here. A city of 30,000 with a symphony, a serious research economy, a hospital, greenways, and Knoxville 25 minutes away, at prices well under what any of that should command. Then I looked closely at the houses. Here's the history that explains everything. The federal government built this entire city in secret in 1942 for the Manhattan Project. 75,000 people lived here at its peak, working on a project most of them didn't understand, in a town that did not appear on maps. And the houses were built as temporary wartime housing. Fast, cheap, on a deadline to standardized designs. Thousands are still standing and still occupied, which says something about how they were made. But they're 80 years old now, and they carry every issue that comes with that era. Wiring, insulation, materials that were standard then and expensive to deal with now. The bargain is real. So is the reason for it. There's a second piece. This city's economy is tied closely to federal appropriations and contracts, which is stable in ordinary years and out of everyone's local control in unusual ones. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Oak Ridge. During the war, this place consumed an enormous share of the entire nation's electricity, and the workers building the components were mostly young women recruited out of Tennessee high schools who were told exactly nothing about what they were making. They found out from the newspaper, with everyone else. Here's the takeaway. Any town where the housing is dramatically cheaper than the amenities would suggest has a reason, and the reason is usually in the building stock or the employer base. Get a contractor who knows houses of that specific era to walk it before you make an offer. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who does their homework before they buy. So, do yourself a favor and hit that like button. Number 1, Clarksville, Tennessee. When I first drove into Clarksville, I honestly could not find the catch. Montgomery County, 45 minutes northwest of Nashville, one of Tennessee's largest cities, with a university, a hospital system, a restored downtown, riverfront, and housing costs well below anything comparable near the capital. On paper, it's the best value in the state, and it might be. Then a woman who'd been here 6 years told me something I hadn't heard anywhere else, and it reframed this entire list. She said she had loved every single house on her street. She just hadn't met the same people twice. Because Clarksville sits beside Fort Campbell. That is a major Army installation, and it is the economic engine of this region, a good one, with real jobs and real stability. But military families rotate. Typical assignments run something like 2 to 3 years, and then the household moves and another arrives. In the neighborhoods closest to post, a significant share of your street may turn over on that cycle, permanently, forever. For a family with school-age kids, that's normal life. For a retiree, it is something else entirely. Because here's what almost nobody plans for when they retire somewhere new. The most consistent finding in retirement research isn't about money. It's that social connection predicts how well the years go. And building it takes time, repetition, and people who stay put. You meet a couple you click with. You have them over. 18 months later, they get orders. Do that 4 times and most people stop trying. Now, here's the wildcard fact about Clarksville. In January of 1999, an F3 tornado went directly through the downtown, badly damaging the courthouse and much of the historic district, and remarkably, nobody was killed. The town rebuilt the courthouse and the downtown rather than abandoning them, which is why the square looks the way it does today. A city that put itself back together on purpose. And that's the fairest thing I can say about it. Clarksville isn't a bad place, it's a genuinely good one, and the value is real. The regret is specific, and it's fixable. Buy further from Post, in an established neighborhood where people have been on the street 20 years, and this problem largely disappears. And honestly, of every town on this list, it's the one I'd most want people to get right. Every town here is a real place with real people, and not one of them belongs on a list of bad towns. That is not what this was. Because here's what I actually learned from the people who regretted their move. Almost none of them regretted the town. They regretted the research. They checked the price, the weather, the taxes, and the scenery, the 4 things every relocation article covers, and then discovered the 5th thing after they'd already sold the house they could never buy back. Nobody regrets a town. They regret a question they didn't ask. So ask them now, while it's free. Is the hospital open tonight, and who owns it? What did this place cost 3 years ago? Which side of the line is the parcel on? How old is the housing stock and why? And who on this street will still be here in 10 years? 5 questions, 1 afternoon. That's the difference between the best decision of your life and the most expensive mistake of it. If this made you think of a question you hadn't asked yet, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment telling me which of these surprised you most. If you moved to Tennessee and regretted it, say so. And if you moved here and it was the best thing you ever did, say that too, because both help the person reading more than anything I can say from here. If this one hits 10,000 likes, I'll do a part 2 on the 10 towns nobody regrets. I'll see you in the next.